Okay, I'm going to wrap up today's content drop with what is probably my most quote-unquote meta loadout. It's got two pinnacle weapons, a really good utility heavy exotic, and then it's got a god tier exotic that coincides with all of it. So my Liar's Handshake is the best rolled armor piece that I have on my account. This is the best exotic I've got. It was the first exotic I got in the Season of Drifter. That's when it was new. And this exotic is the reason why I went for the Mountaintop and why I went for the Recluse. I got this exotic. Previously, I had slept on the Mountaintop for that season, but when I got that exotic, I thought, okay, that is my sign to go for the Mountaintop. So I did. I went for the solo queue experience. I got the Mountaintop. I got the Recluse, and I'm glad I did. I played around with this loadout for quite a while. Later on, I'll show you, this is the loadout that I used to get 5,001 heavy burden kills. And I missed that mechanic. I wish we had the heavy burden mechanic back in Iron Banner, because that was an engaging part of Iron Banner. It was something that I could just chase, and it was fun. But moving on, the subclass focuses around using the Bottom Tree of Arcstrider, which is Way of the Wind. That has an increased sprint speed, which is extremely nice with this build because both of your weapons are lightweight, and then you're also backpacking a sword. So lightweight gives +2 mobility. Mountaintop and Recluse are both lightweight weapons. We have a stat split of 6-5-8, which means we have an invisible +2 when we're using our main weapons, or our primary and our secondary weapon. So it's actually a stat split of 8-5-8. So a lot of mobility, a lot of resilience, or enough resilience to withstand most gunfights, and then a lot of recovery, especially for a hunter. Really good values of recovery. Now I'm using Better Already in my cloak. There are some perks in here that don't line up. Traction is a go-to for me in a lot of cases, especially with this particular type of loadout where you're firing from the hip with Mountaintop and swiveling around and playing in the air, especially with a hunter. But like I said, I don't have a lot of synergy pieces. It's just mostly for the stats. Mostly for the stats and mostly for the aesthetics. But this build is fairly good. It's extremely aggressive, so the way that I tend to play it is through hyper-aggression. It is my most mobile, it's my most DPS-oriented build for PvP. You can take it into PvE as well. It's a solid PvE build. And there's only like one main factor that is not very consistent, and that's actually the Mountaintop, which this clip is here to show you. So, Mountaintop is a grenade launcher. It's a lightweight grenade launcher, a single shot grenade launcher, and it also uses the perk Spike Grenades. Spike Grenades is an excellent perk. Does more damage on direct hits, meaning it'll one shot if you hit somebody with a grenade full on. But there is a lot of shot variance and explosive damage variance with Mountaintop if you're not getting those one shot kills. And I tried to show that off with this clip. I also got flinched out of my mind by that melee. I didn't know that melees could flinch you that bad, but evidently that's what they do. Anyways, the point is, I wanted to use this clip to show how frustrating or aggravating it can be to have a really top tier weapon and then also have a lot of these variances and variables of inefficiency and kind of RNG to your damage if you're trying to play in a calculated manner. Since I like to snipe a lot, it's really easy for me to assess how much damage I can do to somebody, or how much damage I have done to somebody, or what kind of decision process I can make based on how much damage I've done to somebody. But with the Mountaintop, it's kind of guesswork, which is not in and around the way that I like to play. If I know that I body somebody with a high impact snipe, I know that I can clean that kill up really quickly. If I'm leading a gunfight off with the Mountaintop, and it hits somewhere between, the range of a third of their health or 2/3 of their health, I don't know if I can actually clean it up with a non-activated Recluse. Luckily, Liar's Handshake does help provide some extra added utility in those situations, but Recluse on its own, without its perk going, is not the most efficient weapon, as this is kind of evidence. I talked about this earlier in another video, that traction is kind of the perk that you don't want to have if you're using an automatic weapon. It makes for your camera to move around a lot, too much. It creates too much camera movement if you're using traction in a really high sensitivity like I tend to play on. I think that's traction and a high sensitivity is great if you play with semi-automatic weapons, but with automatic weapons like Recluse, it's not great. So this build has kind of like a pick your poison aspect to it through the traction and the sensitivity. I still prefer to use traction with this build because of allowing more swivel speed with Mountaintop, more access to full circle or 360 viewing of the map and my surroundings, because I can swivel my head faster with that. And it is good for hip firing the Mountaintop, as well as playing from the hip. So I do prefer to use traction with this build, even though I think Recluse definitely responds better when you're not using something like traction. I think Recluse is much more stable and much more manageable on controller, which is what I use, if you're not using traction. So I would say that. Now in the background, I've got just a regular game of control and quick play. This is not necessarily the best showing of this loadout. It's not necessarily the worst. I don't really play a lot of the objectives in this game in control. I just don't find control to be that engaging. As a playlist, I'm more of a supremacy player. I prefer the movement modes of supremacy, and I prefer the risk-reward aspects of supremacy over the zone control, hope a lot of people just cluster up in one area kind of aspect of control. And that's what I've always found control to be a little bit like, is the game is kind of doing half of the work for you by dictating where you have to move based on playing the objectives, right? You have to move to B, so you know that there's going to be people at B, and the game tells you there's people at B because you can see the zone being capped, right? So you know where people are. And then you add on to that the radar and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how that guy got me, but that's okay. Supremacy is more of you get to play with the actual map, and you're not forced into moving a specific way, and you're not forced into playing precisely with your team as much. You have a little bit more agency in the movement that you can make around the map. So I think I prefer those type of game modes a little bit more. Same thing with Clash and Rumble. You just get to experience a little bit more agency in your play. But I guess I can talk more about this loadout. So right there, that death that I just had with that gunfight is kind of like a twofold problem, right? My sensitivity is too high to really track efficiently with Recluse. It requires like a delicate input, and so that means that if I'm using a delicate input with a rapid fire weapon, that if I don't have the right input, it'll just spray shots all over and it'll be messy and I won't clean up the kill. Furthermore, if I don't have a kill stack on Recluse, that means I require more accuracy, and my sensitivity doesn't really lend itself to that. However, using traction with the Mountaintop, like I was saying earlier, is a really nice way to play with Mountaintop because of how much access you have to Mountaintop. You play with Mountaintop mainly from the hip, and you play with Recluse mainly ADS, or at least I do, on console. I ADS with the Recluse more than I do Mountaintop. Sometimes I try and ADS with Mountaintop, sometimes I don't. I try and prefer to play with hip-fire Mountaintop shots, utilizing traction so I can swivel back and forth really quickly, and then ADSing to clean up kills or to follow up kills with the Recluse. I think Liar's Handshake is actually a really nice complement to this loadout. I think another complement that you could have to this loadout as well is like Dragon Shadow. I don't have any builds that use Dragon Shadow, despite Dragon Shadow being extremely potent in the Crucible. And I don't have anything against Dragon Shadow at all. In fact, I actually like the way Dragon Shadows play. But I don't find myself really fully engaging with the exotic just because of how good it is, I think. I think I don't want to get used to the handling speed buff, the constant reload buff, the movement speed buff, and all that kind of stuff. It's a phenomenal build. It's a phenomenal exotic, but I think I tend to play a little bit more on the fringes when it comes to my exotics of choice. Like I like Six Coyote and Liar's Handshake, and maybe even Shinobu's Vow every once in a while. Sometimes I like to use Celestial Nighthawk. I tend to play a little bit more on the fringes when it comes to things. Oathkeepers is another one that I really like, because they fit to my playstyle a little bit more. But I think if you're looking for a complement to this particular Mountaintop Recluse loadout, then yeah, Dragon Shadow is a really good one. Stompies is another good one too. Like if you're not locked into playing with traction, And Stompies is a phenomenal way to play with this because you get extra verticality, you get extra sprint speed, you get extra mobility through your slide, you get all kinds of great stuff with Stompies. So that's one of the things that I did want to mention about this subclass in general and how that ties in as a segue with Stompies, is that this subclass, Way of the Wind, has an increased sprint speed, which increases your mobility and access to the map, access to aggression, access to play, access to counterplay, access to support for your teammates, and all those kinds of things. An increased sprint speed is really nice at base, especially if you don't have to have an exotic in order to do it. So that's one of the things that I really like about this, is that I have access to that ability, and it also affects my super. So the other thing too, that was a nice shot by the way, the other thing too that I really enjoy about this is the shield on the dodge. Since I'm using a high recovery, high mobility build, and I don't have any cooldowns on my dodge or anything else, my sprint reduces my dodge cooldown. I tried to get the 1-2 punch melee in here, but I just am bad at the game, so I apologize. Yeah, so the sprint recharging your dodge is a really nice functionality. It's a good synergy. The dodge giving you a shield is a nice synergy with high recovery builds, especially if you're picking up orbs. That guy had a pretty solid shot with Revoker, and I think I might have been damaged there, but that's okay. I really like the synergy between the dodge and the run, or the sprint, and then the recovery value that is permitted through the subclass, allowing you to recover your dodge quickly through a passive ability like your sprint, and then allowing you to spec into a higher recovery value, and then using perks like Better Already or Recuperation to capitalize on that higher recovery value, and use that in conjunction with a really aggressive build that allows you to do some good team plays or some good cleanup plays or some aggressive plays. And then in conjunction with that, having Liar's Handshake, which gives you a lot of health if you can clean up the fight with your melee. It's just a really nice synergy that there's a lot of moving pieces that aren't really moving, but they're kind of tucked subtly backwards into the kit, in the sense that they're invisible perks that don't really show off that they're working, right? They aren't actively doing a whole lot, but when they come together, they create a very aggressive build, and they create a build that feels very fluid to play with. And while I will say that I don't have the best footage, I'm just kind of trying to rush through this and get as much active footage of just normal play as possible. While I don't have the best clips and all that kind of stuff, these are loadouts that I have had good success with in a large variety of activities, and in a large breadth of games as well. I can take this loadout into any venue and still have success with it, because I have an extremely good roll on Liar's Handshake, I have good pinnacle weapons to back it up, I have good subclass and perk synergy, and I think for the most part, running a stat build with this particular subclass is viable. So that is going to wrap it up for me today. I hope you liked my videos, I hope you liked my build, I hope you liked my feedback.